The day I overheard my son on the phone saying, "Don't worry, the old bat won't be around much longer, and then we can sell everything." That was the moment I realized I hadn't raised a caregiver, I had raised a vulture. What he didn't know was that the dying old woman he was so eager to bury had one final move that would change everything. My name is Margaret Chen, and I'm 73 years old. I should be peacefully enjoying my retirement in the beautiful 3-story Victorian home I spent 4 decades lovingly restoring in the historic district of Salem, Oregon. The house sits on 2 acres of meticulously maintained gardens, with original hardwood floors, hand-carved crown molding, and stained glass windows I personally selected from estate sales across the Pacific Northwest. Instead, I was lying in what my son thought was my deathbed on the 2nd floor master bedroom, listening to him plan my funeral while my heart was still beating strong in my chest. Let me take you back to how this nightmare began, because understanding my story means understanding how a lifetime of love and sacrifice can be twisted into something unrecognizable by the very person you trust most in the world. I wasn't born into wealth. Far from it. In 1972, I was a 22-year-old newly graduated nurse working the night shift at Salem General Hospital. I lived in a cramped studio apartment above Mrs. Patterson's bakery, surviving on day-old pastries and the occasional meal from the hospital cafeteria when I worked double shifts. My husband James was a carpenter then, skilled with his hands but terrible with money. We'd been married for 2 years, and every dollar we earned went toward rent, groceries, and James's dream of starting his own construction business. We drove a rusted 1965 Ford pickup that broke down more often than it ran, and our idea of a date night was sharing a milkshake at the local diner. But we had dreams. Big dreams. James would spread blueprints across our tiny kitchen table every evening after work, sketching designs for the custom homes he wanted to build someday. I'd sit beside him after my hospital shifts, still in my white nursing shoes, helping him calculate material costs and labor hours. We talked about the house we'd build together, something with character, something that would last for generations. "Maggie," James would say, his calloused finger tracing the outline of a Victorian mansion he'd drawn. "Someday, we're going to have a house so beautiful that people will stop their cars just to look at it." I believed him. I believed in us. I believed in the future we were building together, one paycheck at a time. When I got pregnant with Robert in 1973, everything changed. Not in the way you might expect. It changed for the better. Suddenly, our dreams had a purpose beyond ourselves. We weren't just building a life for James and Margaret Chen. We were building a legacy for our child. James worked harder than ever, taking on weekend projects and overtime jobs. I picked up extra shifts at the hospital, my growing belly making the long hours increasingly difficult, but I never complained. Every extra dollar went into what we called our house fund, a mason jar hidden behind the flour container in our kitchen cabinet. Robert was born on a snowy February morning in 1974. 7 pounds, 3 ounces of perfect possibility. When the nurse placed him in my arms for the first time, I made him a promise that would shape every decision I made for the next 50 years. "I'm going to give you everything I never had," I whispered to his tiny sleeping face. "You're going to grow up in a house filled with love, stability, and beauty. You're going to have opportunities your father and I could only dream of." It was a promise I kept, sometimes at great personal cost. By 1978, when Robert was 4 years old, James's construction business was finally turning a profit. We'd managed to save a fortune to us then, and we started seriously house hunting. Not for something we could afford, but for something we could transform. That's when we found 1247 Elm Street. The Victorian mansion was a disaster. Built in 1892, it had been abandoned for nearly a decade after the previous owner died and his children couldn't afford the upkeep. The roof leaked in at least 12 places. The foundation had settling issues. The electrical system was a fire hazard, and the plumbing belonged in a museum. But beneath the decay, I could see the bones of something magnificent. 12-foot ceilings with original plaster medallions, a grand staircase with hand-carved balusters, Pocket doors made from old-growth Douglas fir, stained glass windows that caught the morning light like jewels. "James, this is it," I told him as we stood in what would become our living room, rain dripping through the ceiling into strategically placed buckets. "This is our house, Maggie. Are you insane?" He laughed, but I could see the excitement in his eyes. "This place needs everything. Everything. So we'll give it everything," I said. "We'll bring it back to life." The asking price was $45,000. We offered $35,000, with the seller agreeing to carry the mortgage because no bank would finance such a wreck. Our monthly payments were $287, nearly half of our combined income, but we didn't care. We were home. For the next 25 years, that house became our life's work. James handled the structural elements, the foundation, the framing, the roofing. I focused on the details that would make it beautiful. Every weekend, every vacation day, every spare moment was devoted to restoration. Robert grew up thinking it was normal for your mother to spend Saturday mornings stripping wallpaper and your father to spend Sunday afternoons installing crown molding. He played in rooms where we'd torn down walls and slept in bedrooms where paint cans and sawhorses were temporary furniture. "Why can't we just buy a normal house like everyone else?" he'd complain as a teenager, embarrassed by our perpetual construction zone. "Because normal houses don't have character," I'd tell him, showing him how to properly sand a window frame or choose the right stain for original hardwood floors. "Anyone can buy something that's already perfect. We're creating something that will outlast all of us." I was teaching him more than home improvement. I was teaching him the value of dedication, patience, and taking pride in your work. I was showing him that the most worthwhile things in life require time, effort, and sacrifice. At least, I thought I was teaching him those things. While other families took vacations to Disneyland or bought new cars every few years, we invested everything back into the house. My nursing salary paid for groceries and utilities. James's construction income funded our restoration projects. We drove used cars until they literally wouldn't start anymore. We shopped at thrift stores and garage sales, not because we had to, but because every dollar saved was another dollar we could spend on authentic period fixtures or hand-forged hardware. I became an expert in Victorian-era architecture out of necessity. I spent countless hours in the library, researching original paint colors and period-appropriate furniture. I learned to identify authentic antiques from clever reproductions. I developed relationships with estate sale dealers and architectural salvage companies across 3 states. Mrs. Chen knows more about Victorian houses than most of the contractors I work with, James would brag to his friends. And it was true. I'd become accidentally expert in something I'd never intended to study, driven by love for a house that was slowly becoming the most beautiful property in our neighborhood. Robert's childhood was defined by this project. His birthday parties were held in rooms with plastic sheeting and sawdust. His friends came over to play in a backyard filled with salvaged materials and restoration supplies. His homework was done at a kitchen table that doubled as James's workbench, but he never went without. That was important to me. He had new school clothes every fall. He participated in Little League and Boy Scouts. He went on field trips and to summer camp. The house restoration never came at the expense of Robert's needs, it came at the expense of our own comfort. When Robert was 16, he started working summers with James's construction crew. I thought it would help him appreciate the work we'd put into our home. Instead, he seemed resentful of the manual labor and eager to pursue something that wouldn't leave him covered in sawdust at the end of each day. "I don't want to spend my life swinging a hammer like Dad," he told me one evening, his hands still dirty from installing bathroom tile. "I want to do something important. Something that matters." The words stung more than he realized. What we were doing mattered. We were preserving history, creating beauty, building something that would endure. But Robert was 17 and couldn't see beyond the immediate discomfort of physical work. "Education is important," I agreed, already planning how we'd afford college tuition. "You should definitely go to college and find your passion." I meant it. Even if his passion led him away from the house that had consumed our lives, I wanted him to have choices we'd never had. By 2003, when Robert graduated from Oregon State University with a degree in business administration, our house was finally complete. 25 years of weekends, 25 years of sacrifice, 25 years of choosing authenticity over convenience had resulted in something extraordinary. The Victorian mansion at 1247 Elm Street had been featured in Portland Monthly magazine's Historic Homes issue. The local historical society used it as a tour stop during their annual fundraising events. Real estate agents brought clients by just to show them what was possible with vision and dedication. More importantly, it had become our family's anchor. Robert brought college friends home for holidays, and they were always amazed by what his parents had accomplished. "Your house is like a museum," his girlfriend Sarah said during one Thanksgiving dinner, "but it actually feels like a home." That was exactly what I'd hoped to achieve. James and I were in our early 50s then, finally able to enjoy the fruits of our labor. We hosted dinner parties in the formal dining room with its restored chandelier and original hardwood floors. We spent quiet evenings in the library James had built from scratch, surrounded by built-in bookcases and a fireplace with hand-carved mantel. The house was worth nearly $800,000 by then, according to local real estate appraisals. But its value to us was immeasurable. It represented everything we'd worked for, everything we'd achieved together, everything we wanted to pass down to our son. Robert seemed to appreciate it more as an adult than he had as a teenager. He'd bring friends and later romantic partners to see his childhood home, clearly proud of what his parents had accomplished. He'd tell stories about growing up in a construction zone and learning to use power tools before he could ride a bicycle. "You guys created something really special here," he'd say, and my heart would swell with pride and relief. He did understand. He did appreciate the sacrifice. He would carry forward the values we'd tried to instill. At least, that's what I believed. James passed away suddenly in 2019 from a heart attack while working in our garden. He was 69 years old, just 2 years into what should have been a long and peaceful retirement. I found him collapsed between the rose bushes he'd been pruning, his pruning shears still in his hand. The grief was overwhelming. 47 years of marriage, 41 years in the house we'd built together, and suddenly I was alone with all of it. The rooms that had felt warm and welcoming with James's laughter echoing through them now felt cavernous and silent. Robert was wonderful during those first months after his father's death. He handled all the funeral arrangements, dealt with the insurance companies, helped me navigate the legal complexities of becoming a widow. He visited every weekend, bringing groceries and helping with household maintenance that I couldn't manage alone. "Mom, you don't have to stay in this big house by yourself," he'd say gently. "Have you thought about downsizing? Maybe a nice condo or senior community?" I understood his concern. The house was large for one person, and maintaining it required physical capability I wasn't sure I'd have indefinitely. But it was my home. It was filled with 41 years of memories, 41 years of love and sacrifice and dreams realized. "I'm not ready to leave yet," I'd tell him. "This house is part of who I am," and Robert would nod understandingly. "Of course, Mom. Take all the time you need. I just want you to be safe and happy." For 3 years, we maintained this comfortable routine. Robert would visit every weekend, sometimes with his wife Jennifer and their 2 young children. The house came alive again during those visits, filled with the sound of grandchildren's laughter and family conversations. I started giving Robert more involvement in managing the household finances. He helped me set up online banking, organized my important documents, and advised me on investment decisions. As someone with a business degree and 15 years of experience in corporate finance, he understood these things better than I did. "Mom, you've worked hard your whole life," he'd say when helping me review my retirement accounts. "You deserve to enjoy your golden years without worrying about money." He was right. Between James's life insurance, my nursing pension, social security, and the significant value our house had accumulated, I was financially secure for the rest of my life. The house alone was now worth $1.8 million, according to recent appraisals. I felt blessed. I had a beautiful home, financial security, a loving son, and 2 adorable grandchildren. At 70 years old, I was healthier than many people my age, and still capable of living independently. What could possibly go wrong? In March of 2023, everything changed with what the doctors called a minor cardiac event. I'd been working in the garden, planting spring bulbs around the base of our old oak tree, when I suddenly felt dizzy and short of breath. The chest pain wasn't severe, more like pressure than sharp pain, but something told me this wasn't normal. Fatigue. I managed to call 911 before collapsing on the garden path. The ambulance arrived within minutes, and the paramedics were professional and reassuring as they loaded me onto a stretcher. "Probably just a mild heart episode, ma'am," the younger one said. "We're going to take good care of you at the hospital." They confirmed it was indeed a minor heart attack, not life-threatening, but serious enough to require a 3-day stay for observation and treatment. The cardiologist, Dr. Williams, was optimistic about my prognosis. "Mrs. Chen, you're remarkably healthy for 73, he told me while reviewing my test results. "This was what we call a warning shot. With proper medication and some lifestyle adjustments, you should have many good years ahead of you." Robert arrived at the hospital within an hour of my emergency room admission, his face pale with worry. "Mom, I'm so sorry I wasn't here," he said, taking my hand. "Jennifer's with the kids. I came as soon as I got the call." "I'm fine, sweetheart," I assured him. The doctors say it was minor, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He'd already lost his father unexpectedly. The possibility of losing me, too, was clearly terrifying for him. During my hospital stay, Robert barely left my side. He slept in the uncomfortable bedside chair, brought me meals from my favorite restaurant, and asked detailed questions about my treatment plan. He took notes during conversations with doctors and nurses, making sure he understood every aspect of my care. "Mom, I've been thinking," he said on my final day in the hospital. "Maybe it's time we talked about making some preparations. You know, in case something like this happens again." "What kind of preparations?" I asked. "Legal stuff," Robert said carefully. "Making sure your affairs are in order. Power of attorney, healthcare directives, estate planning. Dad handled a lot of that, and I want to make sure you're protected if something happens and you can't make decisions for yourself." It made sense. James had indeed handled most of our legal and financial affairs, and I'd been meaning to update everything since his death. A heart attack, even a minor one, was a wake-up call about my mortality. "That's very thoughtful," I said. "What do you think we should do?" Robert had clearly researched this thoroughly. He'd already contacted an estate planning attorney and scheduled a consultation for the following week. He'd researched the best ways to minimize tax burden and ensure my assets would transfer smoothly when the time came. "The most important thing is making sure you're taken care of for the rest of your life," he explained. "But we also want to be smart about how things are structured to protect your legacy." "Your legacy, our family's legacy, the house, the investments, everything James and I had built together. I want you to inherit everything," I told him. "You're my only child. That's always been the plan." "I know, Mom," Robert said softly. "But there are smart ways to do that and not so smart ways. Let me handle the details. I just want to make sure you're protected and that everything goes smoothly when the time comes." When the time comes. Not if, but when. We were both acknowledging that my heart attack, however minor, was a reminder that my time was limited. I trusted Robert completely. He was my son, my only child, the person who would carry on our family's story after I was gone. If he said there were legal strategies that would protect me and preserve our legacy, I believed him. That trust would prove to be the biggest mistake of my life. 2 weeks after my discharge from the hospital, Robert and I met with Patricia Morrison, the estate planning attorney he'd found. Her office was in a sleek downtown building, all glass and steel and contemporary furniture that somehow managed to be both impressive and intimidating. Patricia was probably in her 50s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of confidence that comes from handling wealthy people's problems for decades. She reviewed my financial situation with professional thoroughness, asking detailed questions about my assets, income, and long-term care preferences. "Mrs. Chen, you have a substantial estate," she said, spreading documents across her polished conference table. "The house alone represents the majority of your wealth, but you also have significant retirement savings and investment accounts." "What's the total value?" I asked, though I had a general idea. "Approximately $2.3 million, Patricia said. "That puts you well above the federal estate tax exemption threshold, which means your son could face a significant tax burden when he inherits." Robert leaned forward in his chair. "That's what we want to avoid. We want to make sure Mom's assets are protected and that the family doesn't lose money to unnecessary taxes." Patricia nodded. "There are several strategies we can employ. The most straightforward is an irrevocable trust, but that can be complex to manage. Given your family situation, I'd actually recommend a direct transfer of assets to Robert now, with appropriate legal protections to ensure your lifetime care." Direct transfer, meaning I would sign over everything to Robert immediately, rather than waiting until my death. "What kind of legal protections?" I asked. "A comprehensive care agreement," Patricia explained. "Robert would legally commit to providing for your housing, medical care, and living expenses for the rest of your life. In exchange, he receives the assets now, avoiding future estate taxes and probate complications." "And if something happens to Robert?" I asked. "If he dies before me?" "The agreement would include provisions for your continued care through his estate," Patricia said. "Plus, we'd set up backup financial arrangements to ensure you're never left without resources." It sounded reasonable. Complicated, but reasonable. And Robert seemed to understand all the legal intricacies better than I did. "What do you think, Mom?" Robert asked. "It would save the family probably $400,000 in taxes, and it ensures you'll be taken care of no matter what." $400,000 in taxes. That was money that could go to my grandchildren's education instead of to the government. It was money that could preserve more of what James and I had built. "How does this work practically?" I asked Patricia. "I mean, day to day. This is still my home, right?" "Absolutely," Patricia assured me. "Nothing changes in terms of your living situation. Robert becomes the legal owner, but you retain full occupancy rights and decision-making authority over your daily life. Think of it as Robert becoming your financial guardian while you remain completely independent." Financial guardian. That sounded protective rather than limiting. "And I can change my mind?" I asked. Patricia exchanged a glance with Robert. "Well, because this is an irrevocable transfer designed to avoid estate taxes, it can't be easily undone. That's what makes it effective for tax purposes. But the care agreement is legally binding, so your security is guaranteed, can't be easily undone." That should have been a red flag, but I was focused on the benefits Robert had outlined. Tax savings, simplified inheritance, guaranteed care for the rest of my life. "I need to think about this," I said. "Of course," Robert said. "Take all the time you need. But Mom, I want you to know that my only goal here is taking care of you and protecting what you and Dad built together." Protecting what you and Dad built together. Those words resonated deeply. This wasn't about Robert getting his inheritance early. This was about preserving our family's legacy and ensuring I'd be cared for properly. Over the next week, I thought about little else. I called my longtime financial advisor, who confirmed that estate taxes could indeed be substantial for someone in my situation. I spoke with my doctor, who assured me that my heart condition was manageable and that I could expect many more years of good health with proper care. Most importantly, I looked around the house James and I had spent 41 years creating. Every room held memories. Every piece of furniture had been carefully chosen. Every architectural detail had been lovingly restored. This wasn't just my home, it was my life's work. If transferring ownership to Robert would protect all of that while ensuring my care, it seemed like the right thing to do. A week later, I called Robert. "I've decided to move forward with the estate transfer." "Are you sure, Mom?" Robert asked, though I could hear the relief in his voice. "I don't want you to feel pressured." "I'm sure," I said. "You're right about protecting our legacy, and I trust you completely." Famous last words. The signing took place in Patricia Morrison's office on a Tuesday morning in early May. I'd dressed carefully for the occasion, my best navy blue suit, the pearl necklace James had given me for our 30th anniversary, low heels that were comfortable but still elegant. I wanted to look competent and dignified, like someone making an informed decision rather than a confused elderly woman being taken advantage of. Robert brought flowers, white roses, my favorite, and Jennifer came along to witness the signing. The children were in school, but Jennifer said they'd wanted to come support Grandma on her important day. Patricia had prepared a stack of documents that seemed overwhelming in their complexity: transfer deeds, care agreements, financial arrangements, legal protections. She walked me through each one, explaining the purpose and implications. This document transfers ownership of the house at 1247 Elm Street to Robert Chen, subject to your lifetime occupancy rights, she said, pointing to signature lines highlighted in yellow. This one establishes the trust fund for your ongoing care expenses. This one outlines Robert's legal obligations for your housing, medical care, and living expenses. The numbers were staggering when laid out in black and white. The house was appraised at $1.85 million. My investment accounts totaled $380,000. My savings and checking accounts held another $65,000. Various smaller assets, jewelry, antiques. My car added up to approximately $50,000. Total estate value, $2.345 million. All of it was being transferred to Robert's name that morning. "Mom, are you comfortable with everything?" Robert asked as I reviewed the documents one final time. I looked around Patricia's conference room, the expensive furniture, the law degrees on the wall, the view of downtown Portland through floor-to-ceiling windows. This was serious business, handled by serious professionals. Robert had spent weeks researching the best approach. Patricia was a respected estate planning attorney. Everything was legal, documented, and designed to protect my interests. "I'm comfortable," I said, and began signing my name. Margaret Chen, Margaret Chen, Margaret Chen. With each signature, I was transferring another piece of what James and I had built to our son. The house where we'd fallen asleep every night for 41 years. The investments we'd carefully accumulated over decades of frugal living. The financial security that was supposed to carry me through my final years. When I signed the last document, Patricia smiled warmly. "Congratulations, Mrs. Chen. Your estate is now properly structured to minimize taxes and ensure your ongoing care." Robert hugged me tightly. "Thank you, Mom. I promise I'll take good care of everything. And I'll take good care of you." Jennifer squeezed my hand. "You're so lucky to have a son who cares about you this much." I felt lucky. I felt protected. I felt like I'd made a responsible decision that would benefit everyone. The feeling would last exactly 4 months. For the first few months after the estate transfer, nothing changed. Robert continued his weekend visits, bringing the grandchildren and helping with household maintenance. Jennifer remained warm and friendly, often staying for Sunday dinner and helping me organize family photos or sort through James's belongings. I continued living exactly as I had before, managing my daily routine, maintaining the house, working in the garden, socializing with my longtime neighbors. The only difference was that Robert now handled all the major financial decisions, paying property taxes and insurance premiums from what was technically his money but felt like our shared family resources. "How are you adjusting to the new arrangements?" Patricia Morrison asked during a follow-up phone call in July. "Everything's wonderful," I told her honestly. "Robert is handling all the financial stress, and I can just focus on enjoying my home and my family." That was true. It was wonderful not to worry about investment management or tax implications or estate planning complexities. Robert had taken on all of those responsibilities, leaving me free to enjoy what I'd always told myself would be my reward for decades of hard work. The first sign that something was wrong came in late August. I'd been in the garden again. I couldn't seem to stay away from my flowers when I heard Robert's voice through the open kitchen window. He was on his phone, standing in what had been James's home office but was now Robert's when he visited. "The old lady's doing fine," I heard him say. "Yeah, the heart thing was scary, but but the doctors say she's got years left. The old lady. Not my mother or mom or even Margaret. The old lady. I told myself he was probably talking to a friend. Maybe making a casual reference that sounded worse than it was. But something about his tone bothered me. It was dismissive in a way I'd never heard before. A few minutes later, Robert came outside to find me. "How's the garden looking, Mom?" he asked, his voice warm and affectionate. "Beautiful as always," I said, studying his face. This was the son I knew, caring, attentive, respectful. Maybe I'd misheard the phone conversation, but over the next few weeks, I started noticing other small changes. Robert seemed less patient. During our conversations, more focused on practical matters than on simply visiting. He'd check his phone frequently during dinner, sometimes stepping outside to take calls. "Business is really busy right now," he'd explain when he came back inside. "Lots of moving parts to manage." I understood. Robert had a demanding job in corporate finance, plus a wife and 2 children. I didn't need to be the center of his universe. But the changes continued. His visits became slightly shorter. His attention seemed divided. And occasionally, I'd overhear fragments of phone conversations that made me uncomfortable. "No, we can't do that until after," followed by silence as he moved to another room. The timeline depends on how long. Again, moving away before I could hear more. I started to feel like I was intruding in my own home when Robert was there. Not because he said anything directly, but because of the subtle ways he'd position himself, taking phone calls in private, having quiet conversations with Jennifer that stopped when I entered the room. In September, I decided to address it directly. "Robert, is everything okay?" I asked during one of his weekend visits. "You seem distracted lately." "Everything's fine, Mom," he said, but he didn't meet my eyes. "Just work stress. You know how it is. Is there anything I can do to help?" I offered. Robert looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his expression I couldn't quite identify. Pity? Impatience? "Mom, you've done enough. Just focus on staying healthy and enjoying your retirement." Staying healthy and enjoying retirement. It sounded reasonable, but something about the way he said it felt like dismissal. Like my role was now to be a well-cared-for elderly woman who didn't need to concern herself with real-world problems. I didn't like that feeling. I'd been managing real-world problems successfully for 73 years. I wasn't ready to be put out to pasture just because I'd had a minor heart episode. But Robert was handling everything competently, and I had no specific complaints about his care. My bills were paid on time. The house was maintained properly. My medical appointments were scheduled and covered by insurance. Maybe I was being overly sensitive. Maybe this was just what it felt like to transition from independence to dependence, even benevolent dependence. I tried to push my concerns aside and focus on the positives. I had a beautiful home, financial security, and family who cared about me. What more could I ask for? The answer to that question would come sooner than I expected. October 15th, 2023. A date I'll remember for the rest of my life. I'd been feeling under the weather that morning, nothing serious. Just the kind of mild fatigue that comes with age and changing seasons. Robert had visited the day before, and I'd mentioned feeling tired during dinner. "Why don't you take it easy today, Mom?" he'd suggested. "Maybe stay in bed a little longer, get some extra rest." It was good advice, so I spent the morning reading in my bedroom, occasionally dozing off with my book resting on my chest. The October sun streamed through the restored stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the hardwood floors James had refinished with his own hands. Around noon, I heard Robert's voice downstairs. He had a key, of course, and often stopped by during the week to check on things or handle business matters. I assumed he'd come to see how I was feeling or perhaps bring me lunch. I was about to call out to let him know I was upstairs when I heard him talking on his phone. Something in his tone made me pause. He sounded different than he did when talking to me, more casual, less careful with his words. "Yeah, I'm at the house now," I heard him say. His voice was coming from the kitchen, directly below my bedroom. "She's upstairs resting. The heart thing has really slowed her down. I stayed quiet, listening. No, she's not getting better, Robert continued. I mean, she's stable, but she's definitely declining. More tired, more confused, less able to manage things on her own. More confused? I wasn't confused about anything. My mind was as sharp as it had ever been. The doctor said people her age often go downhill fast after cardiac events, Robert said. Could be months, could be a year or two, but the trajectory is pretty clear. My heart started beating faster. Robert was discussing my health and prognosis with someone, and his assessment was far more pessimistic than anything my doctors had told me. Don't worry, Robert's voice continued. Everything's already set up. The house, the investments, everything's in my name now. When the time comes, it'll be simple. When the time comes. He was talking about my death like it was an anticipated business event. The old bat signed everything over 6 months ago, Robert said with a laugh that made my blood run cold. She was so worried about estate taxes and taking care of me. She basically handed me a $2.3 million inheritance while she's still breathing. The old bat. There it was again, but this time I heard it clearly. My son was referring to me as the old bat to whoever he was talking to. The best part is the care agreement, Robert continued. I'm legally obligated to take care of her. But the definition of care is pretty flexible. As long as she has a roof over her head and basic medical coverage, I'm fulfilling my obligations. A roof over her head, basic medical coverage. The house I'd spent 41 years creating was being reduced to a roof over her head. She thinks I'm going to keep everything exactly the same forever, Robert said, like this house is some kind of shrine to her and Dad's memory. She has no idea that Jennifer and I have already talked to 3 different real estate agents about listing it. They were planning to sell my house. The house where James and I had spent our entire adult lives. The house that contained 41 years of memories, dreams, and love. The market's hot right now, Robert continued. We could probably get $2.2 million, maybe more if we stage it right. Jennifer's already looking at condos for the old lady. Something small and manageable where she can live out her final years without being such a financial burden. I was a financial burden to my own son. My hands were shaking as I listened to him continue the conversation. Look, I know it sounds cold, but this is business, Robert said. She's got maybe 2 years left, probably less. Why should that money be tied up in a house she can barely maintain when it could be working for our family's future? Working for our family's future. Apparently, I wasn't part of our family anymore. The kids need college funds, Robert continued. Jennifer wants to quit her job and stay home with them. And honestly, after taking care of the old lady for the past few years, we deserve to enjoy the inheritance. Taking care of the old lady. He made it sound like a burden he'd nobly shouldered rather than a son spending time with his mother. Don't worry, the old bat won't be around much longer, Robert said, and I could hear him moving toward the front door. Then we can sell everything and finally start living the life we want. The old bat won't be around much longer. Those words hit me like a physical blow. I sat frozen in my bed, my book forgotten in my lap, as I heard the front door close and Robert's car start in the driveway. My son, my only child, the boy I'd raised with love and sacrifice, the man I'd trusted with everything I owned, was waiting for me to die so he could cash in on my life's work. After Robert left, I remained in my bedroom for hours, staring at the stained glass windows that had taken James and me 3 months to restore. Each piece of colored glass had been carefully cleaned, ray-leaded, and positioned to catch the light just right. We'd worked on them together every evening after dinner, James holding the pieces while I applied the new lead came. These windows will outlast us both, James had said as we installed the final panel. Someday our grandchildren will look through these same windows and remember us. Now those windows would belong to strangers. Robert was planning to sell the house and move me to some small and manageable condo where I could live out my final years without being such a financial burden. I tried to process what I'd heard, to find some innocent explanation for Robert's words. Maybe he was just venting frustration to a friend. Maybe he was speaking hypothetically about worst-case scenarios. Maybe I'd misunderstood the context of the conversation. But deep down, I knew exactly what I'd heard. My son had manipulated me into signing over my entire estate, and now he was counting the days until my death would free him from the obligation to care for me. The care agreement that Patricia Morrison had described as my protection was actually my prison. As long as Robert provided a roof over my head and basic medical coverage, he was fulfilling his legal obligations. I had no recourse if he decided to sell my home and warehouse me in some institutional setting. I'd given him everything, and, in return, he was giving me the bare minimum required by law. The irony was crushing. I'd spent my entire adult life building security, financial security, emotional security, a beautiful home that would anchor our family for generations. And in my desire to protect that security, I'd destroyed it completely. James would be heartbroken if he knew what I'd done. He'd trusted me to preserve what we'd built together, and I'd handed it over to someone who saw it as nothing more than a liquidatable asset. That night, I walked through every room of the house, seeing it with new eyes. The living room where Robert had played with his toys while James and I stripped wallpaper. The kitchen where we'd shared thousands of family meals. The library where James had read bedtime stories to Robert every night for years. In Robert's mind, these were just rooms in a valuable piece of real estate. The memories meant nothing to him. The craftsmanship James had poured into every detail was irrelevant. The decades of love and sacrifice that had created this home were invisible. I found myself standing in James's workshop in the basement, surrounded by tools he'd used to restore our house. His workbench was exactly as he'd left it when he died, covered with hand planes and chisels and measuring instruments that had helped him create something beautiful from something broken. "I'm sorry, James," I whispered to the empty room. "I thought I was protecting what we built. I thought I was ensuring Robert would take care of it properly. But Robert didn't want to take care of anything. He wanted to sell it all and move on with his life, unencumbered by the responsibility of preserving his parents' legacy." I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, my bedroom now, and sat on the edge of the bed James and I had shared for 41 years. The moonlight streaming through those carefully restored windows illuminated the room where we'd made love, shared dreams, comforted each other through difficult times, and planned for a future we thought would include growing old gracefully in the home we'd created together. Instead, I was growing old alone, trapped in a house that legally belonged to someone who couldn't wait for me to die. Over the next few weeks, I began paying closer attention to Robert's behavior during his visits. Now that I knew what to look for, the signs of his deception were everywhere. He'd walk through the house like he was appraising it, commenting on features that might appeal to potential buyers. "This crown molding is really impressive," he'd say, running his hand along the intricate woodwork James had installed. "Original. Hardwood floors like this are rare." He wasn't admiring our craftsmanship. He was calculating market value. When Jennifer visited, she'd make casual comments about how much work the house required. "It must be exhausting to maintain a place this size," she'd say sympathetically. "Have you ever thought about something smaller and more manageable?" She wasn't concerned about my comfort. She was softening me up for the eventual move to a condo. Robert started bringing up practical concerns more frequently. "Mom, what if you fell down these stairs?" he'd ask, gesturing toward the grand staircase that had been one of our proudest restoration achievements. "What if you had another heart episode and couldn't get help quickly?" He wasn't worried about my safety. He was building a case for why I needed to live somewhere else. The most painful part was watching him interact with my grandchildren in the house. 8-year-old Michael and 6-year-old Emma loved visiting Grandma's castle, as they called it. They'd run through the rooms, slide down the banister, and play hide and seek in the library. "Grandma, will you always live in this house?" Emma asked me one Sunday afternoon as we sat in the garden. "I hope so, sweetheart," I told her honestly. "Dad says you might move to a smaller house someday," Michael said. "He says this one is too big for just one person." Even my grandchildren were being prepared for my eviction from my own home. I started researching my legal options, using the computer James had bought me for my 70th birthday. What I discovered was deeply disturbing. The estate transfer I'd signed was indeed irrevocable. Robert now legally owned everything: the house, the investments, the antiques, even my car. I had no ownership stake in any of it. The care agreement was binding, but the language was vague enough to give Robert significant latitude in how he fulfilled his obligations. Suitable housing could mean a studio apartment. Basic medical care could mean Medicare and nothing more. Living expenses could be interpreted as minimal subsistence rather than the comfortable lifestyle I'd expected. If Robert decided to sell the house and move me elsewhere, I would have no legal recourse unless I could prove he was violating the care agreement. And since the agreement was written broadly, proving violation would be nearly impossible. I'd essentially made myself Robert's ward while giving him complete control over the assets that were supposed to fund my care. It was a textbook example of how elderly people could be financially exploited by their own children, even when those children followed the letter of the law. Patricia Morrison had structured the arrangement to protect Robert's interests, not mine. The comprehensive legal protections she'd promised were comprehensive protections for him against any attempts I might make to reclaim my assets. I was trapped, and it was entirely my own fault. As November turned into December, Robert's behavior became increasingly transparent. He started making comments about updating the house to make it more marketable. He suggested replacing the antique light fixtures with more contemporary options. He wondered aloud if the original hardwood floors might look better with a darker stain. "These old houses have so much character," he'd say, "but sometimes character can work against you when you're trying to appeal to modern buyers." Modern buyers. He was no longer even pretending that the house was my permanent home. Jennifer started visiting during weekdays when Robert was at work, ostensibly to check on me, but actually to assess the house's contents. She'd wander through rooms with her phone, taking pictures of furniture and artwork for insurance purposes. "This armoire is gorgeous," she'd say, photographing the piece James had bought me for our 25th anniversary. "Is it an antique?" She wasn't admiring my furniture. She was cataloging assets for future sale. I began to understand that Robert and Jennifer had been planning this for months, possibly since before my heart attack. The estate transfer hadn't been a spontaneous response to my medical emergency. It had been a carefully orchestrated plan to gain control of my assets while I was vulnerable and trusting. The heart attack had simply provided the perfect opportunity to manipulate me into signing over everything I owned. The conversation I'd overheard in October wasn't an isolated incident. As December progressed, I started positioning myself to listen whenever Robert made phone calls during his visits. The picture that emerged was even worse than I'd initially realized. Robert and Jennifer had already put a deposit down on a house in a more expensive neighborhood. They were planning to use the proceeds from selling my house to upgrade their lifestyle significantly. Jennifer had already given notice at her job, planning to become a stay-at-home mother as soon as the inheritance was liquid. They'd researched assisted living facilities and had apparently selected one where I could live comfortably for the remainder of my life. The cost was approximately $4,000 per month, a fraction of what maintaining the house cost annually, leaving the vast majority of my estate free for Robert and Jennifer to enjoy. "She'll actually be safer there," I heard Jennifer tell someone on the phone. "Trained staff, medical supervision, social activities with people her own age. It's really the best thing for everyone, the best thing for everyone. Everyone except me." But the conversation that finally shattered any remaining illusion about Robert's motives happened on December 20th, just 5 days before Christmas. I was in my bedroom pretending to nap when Robert called someone from the kitchen below. By this point, I'd positioned a small chair near the heating vent that carried sound clearly between floors. "How's the old lady doing?" the voice on the other end asked. I could hear it clearly through Robert's speakerphone. "Not great," Robert replied. "She's definitely going downhill. More confused, more dependent. I think the stress of losing Dad and then the heart attack really aged her. More confused, more dependent." I was neither confused nor dependent, but Robert was apparently spreading that narrative to anyone who would listen. "When do you think The voice trailed off. Hard to say, Robert said. Could be 6 months, could be 2 years. But honestly, I hope it's sooner rather than later. This whole caregiving thing is really wearing on Jennifer and me. This whole caregiving thing. My son hoped I would die soon because taking care of me was inconvenient for him and his wife. At least you'll be set financially when it happens, the voice said. Oh yeah, Robert laughed. The house alone is worth over $2 million now, plus the investments and everything else. We're talking about generational wealth for our kids, generational wealth built on my death. You're lucky she trusted you enough to sign everything over, the voice continued. And then Robert said the words that would haunt me forever. Don't worry, the old bat won't be around much longer, and then we can sell everything. There it was again. The old bat won't be around much longer. But this time, I heard something else in his voice. Not just impatience or callousness, but anticipation. He wasn't just waiting for me to die naturally. He was looking forward to it. That night, as I lay in the bed I'd shared with James for 4 decades, I finally understood the full scope of what had happened to me. I hadn't made a generous gift to ensure my son's future. I hadn't structured my estate to minimize taxes and maximize family wealth. I hadn't created a care arrangement that would protect me in my final years. I had signed my own death warrant. Robert now controlled everything: my home, my money, my medical care, my living situation. He could decide where I lived, what level of care I received, and how my remaining years would be spent. And I'd given him every incentive to minimize those expenses and maximize his eventual inheritance. The care agreement that was supposed to protect me was actually protecting him. As long as he met the minimum legal requirements, he could warehouse me in the cheapest possible setting while preserving the maximum amount of my assets for himself. I was completely at his mercy, and he had none. But Robert had made one crucial mistake in his calculations. He'd assumed that his 73-year-old mother was a helpless victim who would quietly accept whatever fate he chose for her. He was about to learn how wrong that assumption was. What my son didn't know was that the dying old woman he was so eager to bury still had some fight left in her. He thought he'd been clever, manipulating a vulnerable elderly woman into signing away her life's work. He thought he'd covered all the legal angles and secured his family's financial future. But Robert had forgotten something important about the woman who'd raised him. I hadn't built my life through weakness or surrender. James and I had created something beautiful and valuable through decades of determination, hard work, and refusing to accept defeat when things got difficult. Those qualities didn't disappear just because I'd turned 73. Robert wanted to play games with my life. He wanted to treat me like a financial burden he couldn't wait to dispose of. He wanted to reduce 41 years of love and sacrifice to a real estate transaction? Fine. But this game had 2 players, and he'd seriously underestimated his opponent. The old bat was about to remind him exactly who he was dealing with. And by the time I was finished, Robert would understand that trying to steal from your mother, especially a mother who'd spent 7 decades learning how to fight for what she believed in, was the biggest mistake of his life. This is the story of how my son tried to bury me before I was dead, and how I made sure he learned that some battles aren't over until the last breath is taken. December 21st dawned gray and cold, matching my emotional state perfectly. I'd barely slept after overhearing Robert's phone conversation, my mind churning with the devastating reality of my situation. The morning light filtering through those carefully restored stained glass windows that would soon belong to strangers seemed dimmer than usual. I made coffee in the kitchen where I'd prepared thousands of family meals, my hands shaking slightly as I measured the grounds. Everything looked the same as it had yesterday morning, but everything had changed. This wasn't my kitchen anymore. This wasn't my house. According to the law, I was just a temporary occupant in someone else's property. The irony was suffocating. I was trapped in the very house I'd spent 4 decades creating, surrounded by memories of a life that apparently meant nothing to the person I'd raised and loved most in the world. But as I sat at the kitchen table James had built with his own hands, sipping coffee from the mug Robert had given me for Mother's Day 15 years earlier, I realized something important. Before I could figure out how to fight back, I needed to understand exactly how I'd gotten into this situation. This wasn't the first time in my life I'd faced seemingly impossible circumstances. I needed to remember who I was before I became the old bat Robert was waiting to dispose of. My story begins 73 years ago in a cramped tenement apartment in Detroit, Michigan. I was born Margaret Walsh on a bitter February morning in 1950, the youngest of 5 children in a family that barely had enough food for 3. My father, Patrick Walsh, worked sporadically at the Fort Rouge plant when his drinking didn't interfere with his employment. My mother, Catherine, took in laundry and mending to supplement his unreliable income. Our apartment on the 2nd floor of a crumbling building had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen so small that only one person could stand in it comfortably. I shared a bed with my 2 sisters, Mary and Frances, while my brothers Tommy and Kevin slept on a pull-out couch in the living room. Privacy was non-existent. Quiet was impossible. The smell of boiled cabbage and industrial laundry soap permeated everything we owned. But even in that chaotic, overcrowded environment, I learned lessons that would shape the rest of my life. "Margaret, you're the smart one," my mother would tell me as she taught me to iron shirts for the neighbors who paid her a nickel each. "You're going to make something of yourself. You're going to have a better life than this." Catherine Walsh was only 35 years old then, but she looked 50. 5 pregnancies, endless worry about money, and the stress of living with an alcoholic husband had aged her prematurely. Her hands were permanently stained from the industrial soap she used, and her back was bent from hours spent hunched over other people's laundry. "How do you know I'm the smart one?" I asked her one evening as we folded sheets together in our tiny living room. "Because you ask questions," she said, smoothing wrinkles with practiced efficiency. "Smart people want to understand how things work. Dumb people just accept what they're given." I was 8 years old, but I understood what she meant. My older siblings had already accepted that our family's poverty was permanent, unchangeable. Mary had dropped out of school at 16 to work at the local Five and Dime. Frances was dating a boy from the neighborhood who worked at the same factory as our father. Tommy and Kevin talked about following in Patrick's footsteps, assuming that seasonal employment at Ford was the best they could hope for. But I couldn't accept that this cramped, chaotic existence was all life had to offer. I wanted to understand why some families had nice houses while we lived in a tenement. I wanted to know why some children had new clothes while we were hand-me-downs from church charity drives. I wanted to figure out how to change our circumstances instead of just enduring them. "Education is the only way out," my mother told me repeatedly. "You stay in school no matter what. You learn everything they'll teach you. And you never, ever let anyone convince you that you're not good enough for something better." School became my refuge and my obsession. While my siblings saw homework as an unwelcome chore, I saw it as a pathway to something better. I studied by the light of a single bulb in our bedroom while my sisters slept, doing math problems and reading assignments with a dedication that probably seemed excessive to my family. But I had a plan, even as a young child. I was going to earn scholarships that would pay for high school and college. I was going to learn a profession that would provide steady income and respect. I was going to create a life so different from my childhood that my own children would never know what it felt like to worry about having enough food or a safe place to sleep. My teachers noticed my determination. Mrs. Henderson, my 4th grade teacher, started giving me extra books to read at home. Mr. Davidson, my 6th grade math teacher, tutored me during lunch breaks to prepare for advanced courses. Miss Kelly, my 8th grade English teacher, helped me apply for an academic scholarship to attend Sacred Heart Academy, the private Catholic high school where wealthy families sent their daughters. "Margaret has exceptional potential," Miss Kelly told my mother during a parent conference I'd begged her to attend. With the right educational opportunities, she could qualify for a full college scholarship. College. The word seemed as foreign and impossible as saying I might fly to the moon. No one in our family had finished high school, let alone attended college. But Miss Kelly spoke about my future with such confidence that even my mother began to believe it might be possible. "What would she study?" Catherine asked, her work-worn hands folded carefully in her lap as she sat in the pristine classroom that was nicer than our entire apartment. "She's shown aptitude for sciences, miss," Kelly replied. "Perhaps nursing or teaching. Both are excellent careers for young women, and both offer steady employment and good wages. Nursing." The moment she said it, I knew that was my answer. Nurses helped people. They had important jobs that required education and skill. They wore clean uniforms and worked in modern hospitals instead of factories. They earned enough money to live in nice houses and send their own children to good schools. I was going to become a nurse, and I was going to use that career to build the kind of life my mother had dreamed about but never achieved. Sacred Heart Academy was like entering a different world. The building was modern and clean, with bright classrooms, well-equipped laboratories, and a library that seemed impossibly vast to someone who'd grown up without a single book in her home. The other students came from families with money: doctors, lawyers, successful businessmen who could afford the tuition without thinking twice about it. I was there on scholarship, which meant I had to maintain perfect grades while also working part-time jobs to pay for uniforms, books, and transportation. Every morning, I took 2 buses to reach the academy, leaving our tenement apartment at 6:30 a.m. and not returning until after p.m. most nights. The academic work was challenging but manageable. I'd always been good at studying, and Sacred Heart's teachers were even more demanding than my previous schools. What was harder was the social isolation. The other girls talked about family vacations to Europe, shopping trips to expensive stores, and college plans that their parents would fund without question. I listened politely but rarely contributed to those conversations, acutely aware that my experiences were completely different from theirs. "Where is your family planning to summer this year?" asked Stephanie Morrison, whose father owned a chain of department stores throughout Michigan. "We don't really do summer vacations," I replied honestly, not mentioning that my idea of a summer adventure was finding a job that paid better than babysitting for neighbors. "Oh," Stephanie said, clearly not knowing how to respond to such an alien concept, but the academic rigor was exactly what I needed. Sacred Heart's science program was exceptional, with laboratory equipment that most public schools couldn't afford and teachers who had advanced degrees from prestigious universities. I threw myself into chemistry, biology, and anatomy with the same intensity I'd applied to everything else in my life. "Miss Walsh, you have a natural aptitude for the medical sciences," Sister Catherine Marie told me during my junior year. "Have you considered applying to the nursing program at University of Michigan?" University of Michigan, one of the most respected nursing schools in the country, and also one of the most expensive. But Sister Catherine Marie explained that strong academic performance could qualify me for scholarships that would cover tuition, room, and board. "What would I need to do?" I asked, already calculating the extra studying and preparation required. "Maintain your current grade point average, score well on entrance examinations, and demonstrate leadership in extracurricular activities," she explained. "I think you're quite capable of meeting those requirements. For the next 2 years, I lived like a monk devoted to academic success. I studied until midnight every night, participated in student government and volunteer activities, and worked part-time jobs to save money for college application fees. I had no social life, no boyfriend, and no interests beyond preparing for my future career. My family didn't understand my single-minded focus. Margaret's always got her nose in a book. My father would complain when neighbors asked about his youngest daughter. Acts like she's too good for the rest of us. But my mother understood. She'd watch me studying at our kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks that cost more than our weekly grocery budget, and she'd nod approvingly. "You're doing what you need to do," she'd tell me quietly. "Don't let anyone make you feel bad about working towards something better." In the spring of 1968, I received the acceptance letter that would change my life forever. The University of Michigan School of Nursing was offering me a full scholarship tuition, room, board, and a small stipend for books and supplies. I would be the first person in my family to attend college, and I wouldn't have to pay a penny for the privilege. My mother cried when I showed her the letter. Not tears of sadness, but tears of pride and relief. "You did it," she whispered, holding the official document like it was made of gold. You actually did it. Moving to Ann Arbor in September 1968 was like immigrating to a foreign country. The University of Michigan campus was larger than the entire neighborhood where I'd grown up. My dormitory room, which I shared with a roommate from Grand Rapids, was cleaner and more comfortable than anywhere I'd ever lived. The dining halls served food I'd never seen before, and the library contained more books than I'd imagined existed in the entire world. But what struck me most was the freedom. For the first time in my life, I could make my own schedule, choose my own activities, and focus entirely on my education without worrying about family obligations or part-time jobs. The scholarship covered everything I needed, leaving me free to immerse myself completely in nursing studies. The coursework was demanding but fascinating. Anatomy and physiology, pharmacology, psychology, medical ethics, every class revealed new layers of complexity in the human experience of health and illness. But more than the academic knowledge, I was learning practical skills that would allow me to care for people during their most vulnerable moments. During my clinical rotations at University Hospital, I discovered that I had a natural ability to connect with patients and families facing medical crises. I could remain calm during emergencies, think clearly under pressure, and provide both technical care and emotional support when people needed it most. "Margaret, you have excellent instincts for patient care," my supervising nurse told me during my pediatric rotation. "You're going to be a very good nurse. A very good nurse." Those words meant everything to me. I wasn't just escaping poverty, I was preparing for a career that would allow me to make a meaningful difference in people's lives while earning enough money to live independently and comfortably. But nursing school also taught me something else that would prove crucial later in life: the importance of advocating for people who couldn't advocate for themselves. Many of our patients were elderly, confused, or too sick to understand their treatment options. Part of our job as nurses was ensuring they received appropriate care even when they couldn't demand it themselves. I had no idea how relevant that lesson would become 50 years later. James Chen entered my life during my senior year of nursing school, in the most unromantic setting imaginable: the emergency room at University Hospital at AM on a Tuesday night in March 1972. I was working the night shift as part of my final clinical rotation when the ambulance brought him in. 23 years old, bleeding from a gash on his forehead, covered in sawdust and looking embarrassed rather than injured. "What happened?" I asked as I cleaned the wound, assessing whether it would need stitches. "Construction accident," James said, wincing as I applied antiseptic. "I was working late on a project, got careless with a power saw. The board kicked back and caught me in the head." "You were using power tools at 2 in the morning?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than judgmental. James smiled, despite the pain. "I'm building kitchen cabinets for a client who's getting married next week. I'm behind schedule, so I've been working extra hours to finish on time." Something about his answer impressed me. This wasn't someone who'd been injured in a bar fight or drunk driving accident. This was someone who took his work seriously enough to put in long hours to meet commitments to his customers. "What kind of construction do you do?" I asked as I prepared the sutures. "Custom carpentry mostly," James replied. "Kitchen cabinets, built-in bookcases, furniture, anything that requires precision woodworking." As I stitched his wound, James told me about his work with a passion that was immediately attractive. He'd learned carpentry from his father, who'd immigrated from China in the 1940s and built a small but successful construction business in Detroit. James had inherited his father's skills but wanted to focus on the artistic aspects of woodworking rather than basic construction. "I want to build things that are beautiful as well as functional," he explained. "Furniture and cabinets that people will treasure for generations instead of replacing every few years. Things that people will treasure for generations." I understood that desire to create something lasting, something that would outlive its creator. "That sounds wonderful," I said, applying the final bandage to his forehead. "You're all set. Keep the wound clean and dry, and have the stitches removed in 10 days. "Thank you," James said, and then hesitated. "This might be inappropriate, but would you like to get coffee sometime?" "When you're not working, I mean, I should have said no. I was 3 months away from graduation, focused entirely on passing my nursing boards and finding my first job. I didn't have time for dating or relationships. But something about James Chen intrigued me. Maybe it was his dedication to his craft, or his willingness to work through the night to meet a commitment. Maybe it was the way he talked about creating beautiful things that would last for generations. I'd like that, I heard myself saying. Our first official date was coffee at a small diner near campus, where James told me more about his background and his dreams for the future. His father had died the previous year, leaving him a small construction business with a solid reputation, but limited resources. James wanted to expand into high-end custom work, but that required better tools, a larger workshop, and the financial stability to turn down quick jobs in favor of longer-term projects. I want to build furniture and cabinets that are works of art, he explained, his eyes lighting up as he described his vision. Pieces made from beautiful wood with traditional joinery techniques, the kind of craftsmanship that's becoming rare in this mass production world. I told him about my own plans, passing my nursing boards, finding a position at a good hospital, earning enough money to rent my own apartment, and maybe even save some money for the future. For the first time in my life, I was close to achieving the financial independence I'd dreamed about since childhood. It sounds like we're both trying to build something, James said thoughtfully. You're building a career that helps people. I'm trying to build a business that creates beautiful things. Over the next few months, as I completed nursing school and James worked to establish his carpentry business, we discovered that our goals were remarkably compatible. We both valued hard work, quality craftsmanship, and the satisfaction of doing something meaningful. We both wanted to create lives that were different from what we'd grown up with. James wanted to elevate construction work from mere labor to artistry, while I wanted to use my nursing career as a foundation for the kind of stable, comfortable life my family had never known. More importantly, we both understood the value of partnership. James needed someone who could manage the business aspects of his carpentry work while he focused on the creative elements. I needed someone who shared my work ethic and my dreams of building something lasting. We could be good partners, James said one evening as we walked around campus, discussing our future plans. In business and in life, he was right. By the time I graduated from nursing school in June 1972, we'd already started planning a life together that would combine his carpentry skills with my nursing career to create the financial stability and beautiful home we both wanted. James and I were married in a small ceremony at Sacred Heart Academy in August 1972. My mother wore her best dress, the same navy blue outfit she'd worn to my high school graduation, and James's mother made Chinese dumplings for the reception. We couldn't afford a honeymoon, but we didn't care. We were too excited about starting our life together to worry about traditions we couldn't afford. Our first apartment was a one-bedroom unit in a complex near downtown Ann Arbor. It was small but clean, with enough space for James to set up a basic workshop in the basement storage area. I'd been hired as a staff nurse at University Hospital, working 3 12-hour shifts per week for a salary that seemed enormous compared to anything my family had ever earned. James was building his custom carpentry business one project at a time, focusing on quality over quantity. He'd spend weeks creating a single kitchen cabinet set or dining room table, charging prices that reflected the time and skill involved. His clients were professors, doctors, and business owners who appreciated fine craftsmanship and were willing to pay for it. We lived modestly but comfortably, saving every possible dollar toward our shared dream of owning a house that James could restore and I could fill with the kind of warmth and stability I'd never experienced as a child. How much do we need to save for a down payment? I asked one evening as we reviewed our finances at our small kitchen table. Depends on what kind of house we want, James replied, spreading out newspaper real estate listings. A fixer-upper that needs major work, or something that's already in good condition. I looked at the photographs of houses we could afford, small ranch homes in subdivisions, older houses that needed significant updates, and a few Victorian-era homes that were listed far below market value because they required extensive restoration. What about this one? I said, pointing to a listing for a Victorian house built in 1892. The photograph showed a 3-story structure with ornate trim and large windows, but the listing description mentioned extensive restoration needed and sold as is. James studied the listing carefully. "That's a big project," he said slowly. "It would take years to restore properly, but when we finished, it would be exactly what we want," I said. "A house with character and history, something beautiful that we created together." James smiled. "You're talking about a 20-year project, Margaret? Maybe more." "So," I said, "we have time, and we have skills. You can handle the construction work, and I can research the historical details and manage the restoration process." That conversation planted the seed that would eventually grow into 1247 Elm Street and 41 years of shared dreams. We didn't know it then, but we were planning the project that would define our marriage and create the legacy I'd eventually sign over to someone who saw it as nothing more than a real estate transaction. In the spring of 1973, I discovered I was pregnant. James and I had been married for 8 months, and while we'd talked about having children eventually, the reality of becoming parents added new urgency to our house hunting plans. "We need more space," I said as I stood in our tiny apartment, trying to imagine where we'd put a crib, baby clothes, and all the equipment that comes with infant care. "And we need it before the baby arrives," James agreed, calculating the timeline. 7 months to find a house, secure financing, and make it livable for a newborn. We started house hunting with new intensity, focusing on properties that offered the best combination of space, potential, and affordability. Most of the houses in our price range were either too small or in neighborhoods where we didn't want to raise children. But in June 1973, we found 1247 Elm Street. The Victorian mansion was exactly what James had warned me about, a massive project that would require years of work and every dollar we could earn or save. Built in 1892, it had 12-foot ceilings, original hardwood floors, and architectural details that were breathtaking even in their deteriorated condition. It also had a leaking roof, outdated electrical and plumbing systems, and foundation issues that would require major structural work. "This is insane," James said as we walked through the house with a real estate agent who seemed eager to get rid of the property. We'd be taking on more work than we could finish in a lifetime, but I could see past the problems to the possibilities. The bones of the house were solid. The architectural details were authentic and beautiful. The lot was large enough for gardens and workshops. Most importantly, it was a house where our child could grow up surrounded by beauty, history, and the satisfaction of watching parents who were building something extraordinary. "James, this is our house," I said as we stood in what would become our living room, rain dripping through the ceiling into strategically placed buckets. "I can feel it." James looked around the damaged room, then at me, then back at the house. "You want to raise our baby in a construction zone?" "I want to raise our baby in a home that we're creating together," I said. "A home that will teach them about hard work, dedication, and the value of building something that lasts." 6 weeks later, we were homeowners. The price was $35,000, financed with a mortgage that represented a significant stretch for our income. But we were committed to the project and to each other. Robert was born on February 15, 1974, in the master bedroom of 1247 Elm Street. The room wasn't finished, the walls still needed painting, and James was in the process of restoring the original hardwood floors, but it was ours. Our son's first breath was taken in the house that would shape his entire childhood and, eventually, become his inheritance. As I held my newborn son in that unfinished room, surrounded by the evidence of our ongoing restoration project, I made him the same promise my mother had made to me decades earlier. "I'm going to give you everything I never had," I whispered to his tiny sleeping face. "You're going to grow up in a house filled with love, stability, and beauty. You're going to have opportunities your father and I could only dream of." It was a promise I kept faithfully for 49 years. A promise that guided every decision I made about Robert's education, opportunities, and future. A promise that ultimately led me to sign over everything I owned to ensure his security and inheritance. a promise that Robert apparently saw as weakness rather than love. As I sat in my kitchen on that cold December morning, remembering the young woman who'd fought her way out of poverty through education and determination, I realized something important. The person Robert dismissed as the old bat wasn't some helpless elderly woman who'd stumbled into wealth and comfort. I was someone who'd built everything I owned through decades of strategic thinking, careful planning, and refusing to accept defeat when circumstances seemed impossible. I'd escaped a childhood of poverty and chaos by outworking everyone around me. I'd earned a college education when no one in my family believed it was possible. I'd built a nursing career that provided financial independence and professional respect. I'd partnered with James to create a beautiful home and a loving family. Every major challenge in my life had been overcome through the same approach: understand the problem, develop a plan, execute that plan with determination, and refuse to give up when things got difficult. Robert thought he'd manipulated a confused old woman into signing away her assets, but he'd actually awakened someone who'd spent 73 years learning how to fight for what she believed in. The question wasn't whether I was capable of fighting back. The question was how to use my experience, knowledge, and remaining resources to regain control of the situation Robert thought he'd locked down completely. I'd built something extraordinary once before, starting with nothing but determination and intelligence. Now I needed to figure out how to rebuild my life and reclaim my legacy, starting with the painful knowledge that my own son was my enemy. The war was just beginning, and Robert had seriously underestimated his opponent. That December morning, as I finished my coffee in the kitchen James had designed and built with his own hands, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: clarity. For too long, I'd been reacting to Robert's manipulation, trying to make sense of his gradual betrayal, struggling to understand how my loving son had become a stranger counting down the days until my death. But sitting there, surrounded by 41 years of memories and love, I remembered who I was beneath the old bat persona Robert had assigned to me. I was Margaret Chen, the girl who'd fought her way out of poverty through intelligence and determination. I was the woman who'd built a nursing career while raising a child and restoring a Victorian mansion. I was someone who'd never accepted defeat when the stakes mattered. And right now, the stakes were everything. Robert thought he'd cornered me completely. He owned my house, controlled my money, and held legal authority over my care. In his mind, I was just a helpless elderly woman whose only remaining purpose was to die conveniently so he could convert my life's work into cash. He was about to learn how wrong that assessment was. I pulled out the small notebook I'd always used for household planning and began writing. At the top of the page, I wrote, "Operation Resurrection: How to Come Back from the Dead," because that's essentially what I needed to do. Robert had buried me legally and financially while I was still breathing. Now I needed to resurrect myself and reclaim control of my own life. The first phase of my plan required understanding exactly what Robert and Jennifer were planning. Over the past month, I'd overheard fragments of conversations, but I needed complete information about their timeline, their strategy, and their vulnerabilities. I started by paying closer attention to their behavior during visits. When Robert made phone calls, I positioned myself where I could hear both sides of conversations. When Jennifer took pictures of furniture and artwork, I noted which items she seemed most interested in. When they discussed my care needs, I listened for specific details about their plans. What I discovered was both infuriating and useful. Robert and Jennifer had developed a comprehensive exit strategy for me. They'd researched assisted living facilities and selected one called Sunset Manor, a bland institutional setting about 40 minutes outside Salem. The monthly cost was $3,800, which would preserve the vast majority of my estate for their use, while meeting the minimum legal requirements of the care agreement. They'd already scheduled preliminary meetings with real estate agents to discuss listing the house in the spring. The plan was to move me to Sunset Manor in March, then put the house on the market immediately afterward. With the hot real estate market, they expected to close the sale by summer and walk away with over $2 million in proceeds. Jennifer had indeed quit her job, effective January 1st, in anticipation of no longer needing employment income. They'd already purchased a larger house in an upscale neighborhood, planning to move once the inheritance was liquid. Most revealing was a conversation I overheard between Robert and someone I assumed was a financial advisor. "The old lady's condition is stable but declining," Robert explained. "Maybe 2 years, probably less. We need to position everything for maximum liquidity when the time comes." "What about capital gains on the property sale?" the advisor asked. "No issue," Robert replied. "Since it's been her primary residence, there's no tax liability. Plus, with her declining health, we'll have medical expenses to offset any other gains." Medical expenses to offset gains. They were already planning to claim tax deductions for my death, but the most useful piece of intelligence came from a conversation between Robert and Jennifer that I overheard from my bedroom. "Are you sure the care agreement is ironclad?" Jennifer asked. "What if she fights us on moving to Sunset Manor?" "She can't fight anything," Robert said confidently. "I have complete legal authority over her living situation as long as I'm meeting the basic care requirements, and Sunset Manor definitely qualifies as appropriate care." "What if she tries to hire a lawyer?" Jennifer pressed. Robert laughed. "With what money? I control all her assets. Besides, what lawyer would take a case against an ironclad estate transfer? Patricia Morrison is one of the best estate attorneys in Oregon. There's no way to undo what we've done. No way to undo what we've done." That's what Robert believed, and that confidence would be his downfall. The next phase required taking inventory of resources Robert didn't know I had. When you've lived for 73 years and spent 41 of them restoring a house, you accumulate things that don't appear on financial statements. First, I had cash. Not much by Robert's standards, but more than he realized. Over the years, I'd maintained a small emergency fund in a safety deposit box at a bank where Robert wasn't listed as a signatory. The account contained $8,500 in cash money I'd saved from small nursing jobs, birthday gifts, and household budget surpluses over the past decade. More importantly, I had relationships. 41 years in the same neighborhood creates connections that don't appear on legal documents. I knew contractors, real estate agents, lawyers, doctors, and business owners who remembered the young couple who'd restored the beautiful Victorian house on Elm Street. I also had documentation. James and I had been meticulous record keepers throughout our marriage. Every receipt, every permit, every contractor invoice, every improvement to the house was filed in my basement office. Robert had access to my current financial accounts, but he'd never bothered to explore the historical records that might be relevant to challenging his control. Most importantly, I had knowledge. 50 years as a nurse had taught me about patient advocacy, medical ethics, and the legal protections available to elderly people facing exploitation. I knew how to research, how to document problems, and how to present cases clearly and persuasively. Robert thought I was just a confused old woman, but I was actually a trained professional with decades of experience advocating for vulnerable people who couldn't protect themselves. The irony was perfect. I was going to use my nursing skills to advocate for myself. On December 28th, I made my first strategic move. I called Dr. Williams, the cardiologist who'd treated me after my heart attack, and scheduled an appointment for a comprehensive health evaluation. "Mrs. Chen, how are you feeling?" Dr. Williams asked as he reviewed my chart. "Any concerns since your last visit?" "Actually, I'm feeling much better than expected," I said truthfully. "My energy has improved. I'm sleeping well, and I haven't had any cardiac symptoms. But I'm concerned about some family issues that might be affecting my stress levels." Dr. Williams looked interested. "What kind of family issues?" I explained the situation carefully, focusing on the medical and legal aspects rather than the emotional betrayal. "My son has assumed control of my financial affairs and is making decisions about my living situation that I don't agree with. I'm concerned that the stress of feeling powerless in my own life might affect my cardiac health. Are you feeling pressured to move from your current living situation?" Dr. Williams asked. "Yes," I said. "He wants to move me to an assisted living facility, but I'm completely capable of living independently. I'm worried that the stress of unwanted institutionalization might trigger another cardiac event. Dr. Williams spent the next hour conducting a thorough examination: blood pressure, cardiac function, cognitive assessment, mobility tests, medication review. When he finished, his conclusion was exactly what I'd hoped for. "Mrs. Chen, you're in excellent health for someone your age," he said, making notes in my chart. "Your cardiac function is stable, your cognitive abilities are completely normal, and you're physically capable of independent living. I see no medical reason why you would need assisted living care. Could you document that assessment?" I asked. "I may need medical evidence of my independence if family members continue pressuring me to move." "Absolutely," Dr. Williams said. "In fact, I'm concerned about what you've described. Forced relocation of elderly people against their will can cause significant psychological and physical harm. If someone is pressuring you to move when you're capable of independent living, that might constitute elder abuse." Elder abuse. The words I'd been hoping to hear. What would constitute elder abuse in a situation like this? I asked. "Financial exploitation, psychological manipulation, forcing unnecessary institutionalization," Dr. Williams explained. "Oregon has strong laws protecting elderly people from family members who try to control their living situations inappropriately." Dr. Williams provided me with contact information for Oregon's elder abuse hotline and the names of 2 attorneys who specialized in elder rights cases. More importantly, he documented my complete mental and physical competence in my medical records. Robert's narrative about my declining condition had just been professionally contradicted. My next strategic move was consulting with an attorney who specialized in elder rights and estate disputes. Using my emergency cash, I hired Margaret Foster, a lawyer whose name Dr. Williams had provided. Margaret Foster was about 50 years old, with the kind of sharp intelligence and aggressive demeanor that comes from years of fighting for elderly clients against manipulative family members. Her office was smaller than Patricia Morrison's, but felt more honest. Less impressive furniture, more case files, photographs of grateful clients rather than expensive artwork. "Mrs. Chen, tell me about your situation," Margaret said, pulling out a yellow legal pad. I explained everything: the heart attack, Robert's pressure to sign the estate transfer, the gradual revelation of his true intentions, the overheard conversations about moving me to assisted living and selling the house. Margaret listened without interrupting, taking detailed notes and asking occasional clarifying questions. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and studied her notes. "This is a classic case of financial elder abuse," she said finally. "Your son used your medical emergency to manipulate you into signing an irrevocable transfer that benefits him at your expense. But is it legal?" I asked. Patricia Morrison assured me that everything was properly documented. "Legal and ethical are different things," Margaret replied. "Yes, the estate transfer is probably legally valid, but the circumstances under which it was obtained might constitute undue influence or exploitation of a vulnerable adult." "What does that mean in practical terms?" I asked. Margaret consulted a thick law book on her desk. "Oregon law provides several potential remedies for elder financial abuse," she explained. "We could file a petition claiming the estate transfer was obtained through undue influence. We could request a court-appointed guardian to review your care arrangements. We could seek injunctive relief to prevent the sale of your house pending investigation." "What would we need to prove undue influence?" I asked. "Several elements," Margaret said, counting on her fingers. "First, that you were in a vulnerable condition when the transfer was made. Second, that Robert had a confidential relationship with you that created opportunities for manipulation. Third, that he benefited from the transfer in ways that were disproportionate to normal inheritance expectations. Fourth, that the transfer was inconsistent with your previous intentions or statements." I thought about each element. The heart attack had certainly made me vulnerable. Robert had positioned himself as my trusted advisor and caregiver. The immediate transfer of a $2.3 million estate was obviously disproportionate, and I'd never previously expressed any intention to give up control of my assets while I was still alive. "How strong would our case be?" I asked. "Stronger than You might think, Margaret said, especially with Dr. Williams's documentation of your current competence and independence. If we can prove that Robert misrepresented your condition to justify the transfer, that strengthens the undue influence claim significantly. What about the care agreement? I asked. Can he really force me to move to assisted living? Margaret studied the documents I'd brought. This care agreement is written very broadly, she said. Robert has significant discretion about your living arrangements. But if we can prove that assisted living is unnecessary given your health status, we might be able to challenge that as well. How long would legal action take? I asked. Months, possibly longer, Margaret admitted. Estate disputes are complex, and Robert will likely hire expensive attorneys to fight us. But Mrs. Chen, you should know that cases like this often settle before going to trial. Once Robert realizes he's facing serious legal challenges, he might be willing to negotiate a more reasonable arrangement. The idea of negotiating with my own son about my right to live in my own house was heartbreaking, but it was better than accepting his current plan to warehouse me while liquidating my life's work. What would you need to get started? I asked. A retainer of $5,000 and signed authorization to represent you, Margaret said. But Mrs. Chen, I want you to understand the risks. Legal action will likely destroy your relationship with your son permanently. And there's no guarantee we'll win. Destroy my relationship with my son permanently. I almost laughed at the irony. What relationship? The son who called me the old bat and looked forward to my death? The son who planned to dump me in an institution so he could spend my money on a bigger house? My relationship with my son is already destroyed, I said. He just doesn't know it yet. While Margaret Foster prepared the legal paperwork to challenge Robert's control, I focused on gathering evidence of his deceptive behavior. If we were going to prove undue influence, we needed documentation of how he'd manipulated me into signing the estate transfer. I started by recreating the timeline of events leading up to the transfer. Using my calendar and medical records, I documented exactly how Robert had used my heart attack to pressure me into believing I needed to surrender control of my assets. The evidence was damning when laid out chronologically. March 15th, heart attack and hospitalization. March 18th, Robert's first mention of getting affairs in order. March 25th, Robert's research into estate planning attorneys. April 2nd, first meeting with Patricia Morrison. April 15th, pressure to make quick decisions about estate transfer. May 10th, signing of irrevocable transfer documents. 6 weeks from heart attack to complete loss of assets. Robert had used my medical emergency to create a false sense of urgency about estate planning, then guided me toward decisions that benefited him at my expense. I also began documenting his current behavior and statements. Using a small digital recorder I'd purchased years earlier to record family stories, I started capturing Robert's phone conversations when he visited the house. The recordings were devastating, the old lady's hanging on longer than we expected. But the doctors say people her age often decline rapidly after cardiac events. Don't worry about the timeline. Once she's in assisted living, we can move forward with the house sale. She signed everything over 6 months ago. There's no way for her to change her mind now. Each recording provided evidence that Robert had systematically misrepresented my health, my competence, and my intentions to justify taking control of my assets. On January 15th, exactly 1 month after overhearing Robert's conversation about my being the old bat who won't be around much longer, I decided it was time for a direct confrontation. Robert arrived for his regular Sunday visit, bringing Jennifer and the grandchildren for what he probably assumed was another routine check on his dying mother. They found me in the living room, dressed in my best suit, with a stack of documents on the coffee table. "Mom, you look nice today," Robert said, though I could see confusion in his eyes. "Are you going somewhere?" "Sit down, Robert," I said calmly. "We need to talk." Robert and Jennifer exchanged glances but took seats on the sofa across from me. The children went to play in the library, giving us privacy for the conversation that was about to change everything. "I know what you're planning," I said without preamble. "What do you mean?" Robert asked, but his face had gone pale. I know about Sunset Manor, I continued. I know about the real estate agents. I know about your plans to sell this house and spend my inheritance while I'm still alive. Jennifer started to speak, but I held up my hand. I know you call me the old bat when you think I can't hear you, I said, my voice steady despite the pain those words caused. I know you're waiting for me to die so you can finally start living the life you want. Robert's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Mom, I think there's been some misunderstanding. The only misunderstanding was mine, I said. I thought I'd raised a son who would care for me with love and respect. Instead, I apparently raised someone who sees me as a financial burden, to be disposed of as cheaply as possible. That's not true, Robert said weakly. Really? I said, reaching for the digital recorder I'd placed on the coffee table. Would you like to hear your own voice explaining how the old bat won't be around much longer? I pressed play, and Robert's voice filled the room. Don't worry, the old bat won't be around much longer, and then we can sell everything. The effect was immediate and devastating. Robert's face went from pale to red to ashen gray. Jennifer looked like she wanted to disappear into the sofa. Even from the library, I could hear the children's laughter, oblivious to the fact that their father's true nature was being exposed in the next room. Mom, I can explain, Robert said desperately. No need, I said, turning off the recorder. You've explained everything quite clearly. You manipulated me into signing over my entire estate by using my heart attack to create false urgency about estate planning. You misrepresented my health condition to justify taking control of my assets. And now you're planning to warehouse me in an institution so you can liquidate my life's work. It's not like that, Jennifer said, finding her voice. We just want what's best for everyone. What's best for everyone, I repeated, including the part where you quit your job in anticipation of spending my money, including the part where you've already bought a bigger house using my assets as collateral. Silence. They had no defense because everything I'd said was true. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, reaching for the legal documents Margaret Foster had prepared. I'm challenging the estate transfer on grounds of undue influence and elder financial abuse. I'm seeking court protection to prevent you from selling this house or moving me against my will, and I'm documenting everything you've done for potential criminal prosecution. You can't do that, Robert said, panic creeping into his voice. The estate transfer is irrevocable, Patricia Morrison said. Patricia Morrison represented your interests, not mine, I said. My attorney has a different opinion about whether an estate transfer obtained through manipulation of a vulnerable adult can be reversed. Your attorney? Robert asked. What attorney? You don't have access to money for attorneys, I smiled. For the first time in months, Robert, you may control my major assets, but you've never been as smart as you think you are. I have resources you don't know about, relationships you never considered, and legal protections you never researched. What kind of legal protections? Jennifer asked nervously. Oregon has very strong laws against elder financial abuse, I explained. When adult children manipulate vulnerable parents into signing over assets, that's a felony. When they misrepresent care needs to justify institutional placement, that's another felony. When they steal from their parents' estates, the state can seek full restitution plus penalties. Robert was looking sick. Mom, we never meant to hurt you. We just thought. You thought I was a helpless old woman who would die conveniently and leave you free to enjoy my money, I said. You thought wrong. The next 6 months were the most intense of my life since James's death. Margaret Foster filed our legal challenge on January 20th, requesting emergency injunctive relief to prevent Robert from selling the house or forcing me into assisted living pending resolution of the estate dispute. Robert hired Patricia Morrison to defend against our challenge, leading to the surreal situation of the attorney who'd helped create the problematic estate transfer now defending it against claims of elder abuse. The legal battle was complex and expensive, but several factors worked in our favor. First, Dr. Williams's documentation of my complete mental and physical competence undermined Robert's claims that I needed institutional care. When the court ordered an independent medical evaluation, The results confirmed that I was fully capable of independent living. Second, the recordings I'd made of Robert's conversations provided clear evidence that he'd misrepresented my condition and his motivations for the estate transfer. His own words contradicted the narrative of loving son caring for declining mother. Third, financial records showed that Robert and Jennifer had indeed made major purchases and life changes based on anticipated inheritance, supporting our claim that the estate transfer was part of a planned exploitation rather than legitimate care planning. Most importantly, the timeline of events supported our undue influence claim. The speed with which Robert had moved from my heart attack to complete asset transfer, combined with his use of my medical emergency to create false urgency, demonstrated a pattern of manipulation. Robert's defense was weak because it was based on lies. Patricia Morrison argued that the estate transfer was legitimate and that Robert had acted in my best interests, but the evidence contradicted those claims at every point. The breakthrough came in April when Margaret Foster deposed Patricia Morrison about her original consultation with Robert and me. Under oath, Patricia admitted that Robert had described my condition as declining rapidly and had suggested that quick action was necessary to protect my assets. But my medical records showed no evidence of rapid decline. Dr. Williams testified that my condition was stable and that there was no medical urgency requiring immediate estate planning decisions. The court found clear evidence of undue influence and misrepresentation. In a scathing ruling, Judge Patricia Webb wrote, "The defendant exploited his mother's medical emergency to manipulate her into surrendering control of substantial assets that he then planned to liquidate for his personal benefit while providing her with minimal care. This represents a textbook case of elder financial abuse perpetrated through breach of fiduciary duty and undue influence." On June 12, exactly 1 year after I'd signed away my life's work, Judge Webb issued her final ruling. The estate transfer was declared void due to undue influence and elder financial abuse. All assets were returned to my control immediately. Robert was ordered to pay restitution for any assets he'd spent or committed, plus legal fees and court costs. The care agreement was declared unenforceable due to the circumstances under which it was obtained. I was granted full independence and protection against any future attempts at forced institutionalization. Most satisfying, Robert was ordered to undergo counseling for elder abuse and was placed on probation with the state's Adult Protective Services Division. The financial impact on Robert and Jennifer was devastating. They'd already committed to purchase a new house using my assets as collateral. Jennifer had quit her job. They'd made major purchases based on anticipated inheritance. Now they faced not only the loss of expected money but also significant legal fees and restitution payments. The house they'd planned to buy was lost when they couldn't secure financing without my assets. Jennifer had to find new employment. They faced the possibility of bankruptcy if they couldn't meet their restitution obligations. But the most important victory was simpler. I was free. Free to live in my own house, free to control my own money, free to make my own decisions about my care and my future. The day after the court ruling, Robert came to the house one final time. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 6 months, hollow-eyed, defeated, carrying the weight of his failed scheme and its consequences. "Mom," he said, standing in the doorway of the living room where James and I had shared so many happy memories. "I'm sorry, are you?" I asked. "Are you sorry for trying to steal my life's work, or are you sorry you got caught?" Robert didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry for all of it. I'm sorry for betraying your trust. I'm sorry for treating you like you were already dead. I'm sorry for forgetting that everything I was trying to take was something you and Dad built together." "Why?" I asked. "Help me understand how the boy I raised with love and sacrifice became someone who could call his mother the old bat and look forward to her death." Robert sat down heavily, looking older than his 49 years. "I got greedy," he said. "Simply, I saw all that money sitting there, and I started thinking about what Jennifer and I could do with it. The kids' college funds, a bigger house, financial security. It seemed like the transfer was good for everyone you'd be taken care of, and we'd have the resources to give our children better opportunities. So you decided I didn't need to be consulted about my own life? I asked. I convinced myself that you were declining, Robert said, that you'd be happier in assisted living, that the house was too much work for you, that you'd want us to benefit from your assets rather than letting them sit unused. You convinced yourself, I repeated. Or you convinced yourself of what you wanted to believe. Robert was quiet for a long moment. I wanted to believe it, he admitted finally, because it was easier than admitting I was stealing from my own mother. That admission, brutal in its honesty, was probably the first completely truthful thing Robert had said to me in over a year. Robert, I said, I spent 49 years trying to give you everything I never had. Education, opportunities, a beautiful home, financial security. I thought I was raising someone who would value those gifts and pass them on to his own children. You did, Robert said. You gave me everything. That's what makes this so unforgivable. What makes it unforgivable, I said, is that you were willing to steal not just my money, but my dignity, my independence, and my right to live and die in the home I created. You were willing to warehouse me like discarded furniture while you enjoyed the fruits of my life's work. Robert was crying now, not the tears of self-pity, but the tears of someone who finally understood the magnitude of what he'd lost. Can you ever forgive me? He asked. I considered the question carefully. Could I forgive the son who'd called me the old bat? Could I forgive someone who'd looked forward to my death as a financial opportunity? Could I forgive the betrayal of 50 years of love and sacrifice? I can forgive you, I said finally, but I can't trust you, and without trust, there's no relationship. What does that mean? Robert asked. It means you're no longer my heir, I said. It means you're no longer welcome in this house. It means that when I die, everything James and I built will go to people who will value it properly. The pain in Robert's eyes was devastating, but I felt no urge to comfort him. He'd made his choices. Now he would live with the consequences. Mom, please, Robert said. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but please don't cut me out of your life completely. I'll do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. Robert, I said gently, trust isn't something you can earn back after what you've done. Trust is like a mirror. Once it's broken, it's never the same again. After Robert left that day, I sat alone in my living room for a long time, processing what had happened and what came next. I'd won the legal battle and reclaimed control of my life, but the emotional cost was enormous. I'd lost my son, maybe permanently. My grandchildren would grow up knowing their father had tried to steal from their grandmother. The family I'd worked so hard to create and nurture was destroyed. But I'd also discovered something important about myself. At 74 years old, I was still capable of fighting for what I believed in. I was still capable of strategic thinking, careful planning, and determined execution. I was still the same person who'd escaped poverty through education, built a nursing career through dedication, and created a beautiful home through decades of hard work. Robert had tried to reduce me to the old bat who was just waiting to die. Instead, he'd awakened someone who remembered how to fight. Over the following months, I restructured my life and my estate planning. I hired a new attorney who specialized in protecting elderly people from family exploitation. I created an irrevocable trust that would preserve the house as a historical landmark after my death. I established scholarships for nursing students from low-income families, ensuring that my money would help other young women escape poverty through education. Most importantly, I reconnected with the community that had supported James and me throughout our 41 years on Elm Street. Neighbors who'd watched us restore the house, friends who'd shared our dinner table, colleagues who'd worked with me at the hospital, people who valued me for who I was rather than what I owned. Dr. Williams continued to monitor my health, documenting my ongoing independence and capability. Margaret Foster became not just my attorney, but a friend who understood the challenge of protecting elderly people from those who should love them most. I started volunteering with Oregon's Elder Protection Services, helping other elderly people recognize and resist financial exploitation by family members. My experience with Robert became a teaching tool for other vulnerable adults who needed to understand that manipulation often comes wrapped in concern and love. 18 months after Robert's failed scheme, I'm still living independently in the house James and I created together. At 75, I'm healthier and happier than I was during the dark period when my own son was plotting to steal my life's work. The Victorian mansion at 1247 Elm Street has been designated as a historical landmark, ensuring that it will be preserved for future generations regardless of what happens to me. The gardens James and I planted continue to bloom each spring. The rooms we restored continue to shelter me with the same warmth and beauty we created decades ago. Robert occasionally drives by the house. Neighbors have told me they've seen his car, but he's never knocked on the door. Jennifer filed for divorce 6 months after the court ruling, taking the children and leaving him to face the financial consequences of his failed scheme alone. My grandchildren will inherit the trust I've established, but only after they reach 30 years old and demonstrate that they've learned to value work, education, and genuine achievement over inherited wealth. They'll have opportunities, but they'll have to earn them. The money that would have gone to Robert is now funding scholarships for nursing students, supporting historical preservation projects, and providing legal aid for elderly people facing financial exploitation. My legacy will help people build their own lives rather than simply inheriting wealth they didn't create. I've learned that the greatest gift you can give your children isn't money, it's values. I gave Robert every material advantage, every educational opportunity, every comfort I could provide. But somehow, in my efforts to ensure he never experienced the poverty and insecurity of my childhood, I failed to teach him the value of the sacrifices that created his advantages. He saw my love as weakness to be exploited rather than strength to be honored. He saw my trust as naivety rather than the foundation of family relationships. He saw my vulnerability after the heart attack as an opportunity rather than a moment when he should have protected me most carefully. But his betrayal also taught me something important about resilience. At 73, when I thought my fighting days were over, I discovered that I still had the intelligence, determination, and strategic thinking that had carried me through every previous challenge in my life. Robert called me the old bat, thinking that dismissive label would make me easier to discard. Instead, he reminded me that I was someone who'd never accepted defeat when the stakes mattered, and nothing had ever mattered more than reclaiming my right to live and die with dignity in the home I'd created through 41 years of love and labor. If you're watching this story and recognizing elements of your own situation, if someone in your family is pressuring you to sign over assets for your own protection, if someone is telling you that you're too old or confused to make your own decisions, if someone is planning your institutionalization while you're still capable of independence, please remember this. You are never too old to fight for what's rightfully yours. You are never too vulnerable to demand respect and dignity. You are never too trusting to recognize manipulation when it's wrapped in false concern. The people who truly love you will support your independence, not undermine it. They will respect your right to make your own decisions about your life and your assets. They will see your eventual death as a loss to be mourned, not a financial opportunity to be anticipated. If someone in your family is treating you the way Robert treated me, get help immediately. Contact Elder Protection Services. Consult with an attorney who specializes in elder rights. Document everything. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. And remember that your life's work, whether it's a house, a business, or simply the love and sacrifice you've invested in your family, deserves to be honored, not liquidated by people who see you as an obstacle to their financial goals. You built something valuable through decades of effort. Don't let anyone convince you that you're too old, too confused, or too burdensome to protect what you've created. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to be a victim, especially when the predator is someone you raised and trusted with everything you had to give. My name is Margaret Chen. I'm 75 years old. I live independently in the house I spent 41 years creating with my late husband James. And I'm here to tell you that it's never too late to fight back when someone tries to steal your life while you're still living it. The old bat turned out to have more fight left than anyone imagined. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.